My name is Simone Trask. I am 29 years old, and right now the woman standing at the head of my aunt's dining room table. The woman who built a pediatric surgery program from the ground up, whose name is on a wing of Mercy General Hospital in downtown Philadelphia, has just stopped walking a slow, deliberate loop around the table and placed both hands on the back of my chair. The toast she was giving about my brother's promotion started 4 minutes ago. It has turned into something else entirely. She looks down at me and says, in a voice that does not raise itself for anyone, "I'm sorry. I need to stop for a moment. Because I think I already know you." Every glass in the room stays suspended halfway between table and mouth. My mother's smile doesn't move, but something behind her eyes calculates very quickly. "This is Simone," my mother said 3 hours ago when she introduced me at the door. "She helps out with, clerical things. She's very behind the scenes." Dr. Whitmore didn't look at my mother. She looked at me. To understand how I became the daughter my own family rehearsed out of the room before company arrived, you have to understand the refrigerator door. When I was 7 years old, my mother put a laminated chart on the refrigerator. It had 2 columns. My brother Theo's column had gold stars going all the way down. Soccer tryouts, spelling bee, science fair, and in his column there was always something new. My column had a single star at the top from when I spelled necessary correctly in the 2nd grade. It never got a second one. I asked her once why mine was empty. She said, "Because you haven't done anything worth putting up yet." I stopped looking at the chart. I started looking at what I could do when nobody was looking. I was quiet about most of it. That was partly the kind of kid I was, and partly because I learned early that celebrating myself in that house only ever produced a very specific kind of silence. Not the comfortable kind. The kind where everyone in the room suddenly finds something else to look at, and then someone changes the subject to Theo. My brother is a good person. I want to be clear about that. He didn't build the chart. He didn't design what happened to me in that house. He was just the kid who happened to fit what my parents were able to see, and I was the kid who didn't, and neither one of us picked that. But it still happened. I went to Temple University on a scholarship my mother didn't know existed, until the acceptance letter came, because I had applied without telling her. When she saw it, she said, "Are you sure that's the right fit for you?" Theo always said the commuter track might suit you better. Theo was 15 at the time, and had never said any such thing. I know because I asked him. I went to Temple anyway. I studied architecture. I was the kind of student who slept in the studio and ate crackers and kept a blanket rolled up under the drafting table. Because the building stayed open all night and the light was better than in the dorms. I graduated with honors and a portfolio that my thesis advisor, a very small woman named Dr. Pereira who had no patience for anything she considered soft, described to the jury as structurally rigorous and formally surprising. That was the highest thing she ever said about anyone's work. I called my mother from the parking lot of the ceremony. She asked whether I'd heard that Theo had been offered a position in the marketing division of a regional insurance firm. "He starts Monday," she said. I bought him a tie. I sat in my car for a while after that, then I drove back to Philadelphia and started looking for jobs. The first firm that hired me was a mid-sized practice in Fishtown. I was the most junior person in the room for 2 years, which meant I spent a lot of time doing work that showed up in other people's rendering sets, code compliance reviews, spec books, the invisible architecture of architecture, which is mostly just making sure the thing you're building doesn't fall down or catch fire. I got good at it. Then I got my license, and the work changed. The commission I'm most known for, though I don't use the word known in my family, because it has never applied to me there, is a community health clinic in Kensington, a neighborhood in Philadelphia that has been through a lot, and is still going through a lot, and where the building I designed is the first thing that has been built new in that particular in about 14 years. We worked on it for 3 years. The construction ran through a winter that broke records. There were supply chain issues and a contractor who quit mid-frame and a zoning appeal that kept us in hearings for 4 months. The building opened on a Tuesday in March. There was no ribbon. The executive director cut a piece of twine with kitchen scissors because nobody had thought to bring actual ribbon, and about 30 people stood in the cold and clapped. A reporter from the Inquirer came and took some photos. The piece that ran called the building quietly radical, which is the best review I've ever gotten for anything. My mother called that evening. I picked up expecting to talk about it. She said, "Did you know Theo got a bonus?" I said I hadn't heard. She said it was substantial. I said congratulations. She said he was thinking about buying a place in Chestnut Hill. I hung up and stood in my kitchen, looking at the framed photo of the Kensington Clinic that my colleague Jarvis had printed and mounted for me as a joke about how I never decorated my apartment. Outside, the city made its ordinary sounds. I watered a plant I'd been keeping alive through sheer stubbornness and went to bed. I want to be honest about something, because it matters for understanding what happened at that dinner table. I was not walking around my life in active pain about my family. I had gotten past the stage where I waited for things to be different. You reach a point where waiting starts to look like a choice, and you stop making it. I had my work, I had my license, I had Jarvis and 2 other colleagues I trusted, and a studios that stayed warm in February, because I'd finally figured out the thermostat. I was fine. What I was not expecting was Dr. Margaret Whitmore. She came into my professional life about 14 months before the dinner, when Mercy General commissioned a feasibility study for a satellite clinic expansion in Northeast Philadelphia. Our firm was brought in on the architectural end. Dr. Whitmore was the chair of the pediatric surgery department, and also, it turned out, the person who had quietly championed the expansion for 6 years before anyone in administration had agreed to fund it. She came to every meeting. She reviewed every drawing. She asked questions that were so specific and well-informed that my project manager whispered to me after the first session. Did she go to architecture school in a past life or something? She had not gone to architecture school. She had just cared enough about a building to learn how buildings worked. At the 3rd meeting, she stayed after everyone else had left. She sat across the table from me and said, "The way you handled the entrance sequence, putting the pediatric wing at grade so the kids who come in scared aren't immediately going up in an elevator. That wasn't in the brief. Why did you add it?" I told her what I told every client when I made a move that wasn't in the brief, which was the truth. Because the brief doesn't always know what it needs yet. She looked at me for a moment. "I'm going to use that sentence," she said. "I've been trying to explain for years why medicine is still partly an art." We worked together for another 8 months. I learned what pediatric surgery programs actually needed from a building, and she learned, or seemed to, anyway, how to read a floor plan. At the end of the project, she wrote a letter to our firm that my principal called one of the best client letters I have seen in 23 years of practice. It named me specifically. It said the clinic design demonstrated an understanding of how humans actually move through distress, and that in her experience, that was rare. I have the letter in a drawer. I have not shown it to my mother. 8 days before the dinner, my mother called. "Your aunt is hosting," she said, "for Theo's promotion." He had moved from the regional insurance firm into a director position at a healthcare consulting company. It was a good job. I was glad for him. "Dr. Whitmore will be there," my mother said, in the voice she uses when she is about to tell me something she has decided in advance. "She's on the board of the foundation that funds Theo's company's wellness initiative. She's an important person, Simone. Very accomplished. Just be pleasant and stay out of the way. Let Theo have his evening." I said I would come, she said. "Wear something appropriate, not the construction jacket." I do not own a construction jacket. I own a very good wool blazer that I bought the year I got my license and have worn to every significant professional event since, because it is the one piece of clothing that was present the first time I ever stood in front of a client and realized I knew exactly what I was doing. I wore the blazer. My aunt opened the door. The house smelled like garlic and something in a slow oven. My uncle took my coat. Theo was in the living room with a beer, talking to Dr. Whitmore's husband, a soft-spoken man named Gerald, who had recently retired from teaching high school biology and had thoughts about sourdough that turned out to be genuinely interesting. Then my mother appeared at my elbow. "Dr. Whitmore is in the kitchen with your aunt," she said quietly. "I introduced everyone already. I told her you work in an administrative capacity at an architecture firm. Clerical support. Very behind the scenes." I looked at her. "Mom, it's not the place, Simone. Theo has worked very hard for this moment. His company does business with her foundation. Just one evening. This is the thing about a long pattern. You know it's shaped so well that when it happens again, part of you just recognizes it. Like seeing a piece of furniture that has always been in the wrong corner of the room. You've walked around it so many times that you've almost forgotten it could go somewhere else." I went in and sat down at the table. My mother had put my place card at the far end, near the corner, next to the door to the back hallway where the coats were. Theo was at the center. Dr. Whitmore was 2 seats to his left, which meant she was facing my end of the table, but at a distance where easy conversation across the table wasn't quite possible. My mother poured wine, and laughed in the right places, and steered the conversation with the precision of someone who had been doing it for 30 years. Whenever it drifted toward me, she redirected it. When Dr. Whitmore's husband asked me what I did, my mother answered first. "Oh, Simone does some support work at a design office. Very behind the scenes, like I said." When Theo's girlfriend tried to include me by asking whether I had any projects I was excited about, my mother said, "Simone, can you grab the bread basket?" And the moment closed. The 4th time, I was in the middle of explaining to Gerald that my firm had just been shortlisted for a school renovation in Camden, when my mother touched his arm and said, "Gerald, I have to tell you about the sourdough culture Theo brought back from San Francisco." Gerald, politely and without apparent guile, said, "Actually, I want to hear about the school. My daughter teaches there." My mother's smile stayed on. Dr. Whitmore put down her fork. She had been quiet for most of dinner. Not absent, I noticed she noticed things. The way she watched conversations reroute. The way her expression stayed still when someone cut across someone else. She had the kind of stillness you develop when you've spent decades in operating rooms where stillness is a professional requirement. She picked up her wine glass and stood. My uncle made a small encouraging noise. She spoke about Theo warmly and specifically. She mentioned his analytical precision, the way he had navigated a difficult funding gap in the wellness initiative, the fact that he had followed up on every commitment he made. It was a real toast, built out of real details. Theo looked genuinely touched. Then she said, "Before I sit down, I need to do something that wasn't on the agenda." She began to walk around the outer edge of the table. The way she moved was very measured. There was no performance in it. She was just a woman who walked the way she talked, with the weight of someone who had made significant decisions and had learned not to waste motion. She stopped, behind my chair. "I'm sorry to interrupt the evening," she said. "But I've been trying to figure out since I walked in the door why your face looks so familiar, and I just remembered." She looked at my mother briefly, then back at me. "You designed the Kensington Primary Care Clinic." The table went quiet. "I toured that building in April," she said. "Our foundation was evaluating it as a potential model for our Northeast expansion sites. We brought it to the board as an exemplary example of trauma-informed spatial design. The entrance sequence alone. I've described it to 4 different architects, and 3 of them told me it was obvious in hindsight, and they couldn't understand why they hadn't thought of it." She paused. "Your name was on the plans. Simone Trask, licensed architect. I stared at your name for probably 3 minutes in the board presentation." My mother made a small sound. Dr. Whitmore did not look at her. "I was told you did clerical work," she said, in the same level voice. It was not an accusation. It was just a statement of information that did not compute. Gerald put his fork down very slowly. Theo looked at my mother. My mother's hands were in her lap. It wasn't the time to Theo's evening, Mom." Theo's voice was quiet. "What did you say to them?" "I told her that Simone works in the background, at a firm, which is true. I'm a licensed architect," I said. "I've been licensed for 4 years. The Kensington Clinic was a 3-year commission. Before that I spent 5 years at a firm in Fishtown, doing everything from code compliance to project management." The room was very still. My aunt, who had been sitting at the far end with her hands folded, said, in a voice I had not heard her use before, "Linda, what exactly have you been telling people about Simone?" My mother's eyes filled. "I wasn't trying to, I just didn't want her to overshadow Theo." My aunt's voice did not rise. "Your daughter designed a building that's being used as a national model for community healthcare facilities, and you told people she does clerical work, so she wouldn't take attention away from her brother's promotion dinner. You don't understand how she makes everything about herself." "That is not what happened tonight," Theo said. "None of that was Simone." He looked at me and his expression was something I hadn't seen directed at me in a long time. "I didn't know," he said. "I swear I didn't know. She told them that. She told me you'd rather be low-key about your work." "I didn't say that, I know." He looked at the table. "I should have asked you directly. That's on me." Dr. Whitmore reached into her jacket pocket. She placed a card next to my water glass. "I'd like to have a proper conversation about the Northeast sites," she said. "What you did in Kensington is exactly what we've been trying to explain to 3 separate architecture firms for 2 years. If you're open to it, I'd like to bring you in as a consultant on the expansion planning." Gerald put his hand on my arm briefly. "My daughter is going to lose her mind when I tell her." My mother fumbled with her napkin. Theo stood up. He said, "Can I say something?" and then said it without waiting to find out whether he could. "Mom has been describing Simone's work to people in a way that isn't accurate for I don't know how long, years probably, and I think I've let that happen because it was easier than asking questions." He picked up his wine glass and looked at me across the table. "I'm proud of what I do. I should have been saying this already. I'm proud of what you do, and I'm sorry that I let her version of it stand." It was the longest thing Theo had said to me directly in probably 5 years. My mother's voice, when it came, was high and thin. "I was trying to protect the family. Simone's work is very political, very complicated. People have opinions. I didn't want that following Theo into his career." "Mom," this time it was my aunt. "Stop." There was a silence that sat over the whole table like weather. Dr. Whitmore, still standing, said simply, "What you described, protecting the family, what that looked like from where I was sitting was a mother erasing one child's accomplishments to manage the room around another child. I've seen parents do a version of that in my clinic waiting room. It doesn't protect anyone. It just teaches the erased child that their presence is a liability." My mother pressed her napkin against her eyes. My uncle, who had not spoken since he took my coat at the door, looked up from his plate. He said, "She's right, Linda. That's what it looked like." I sat at that table for another moment. I thought about what I wanted to say. I had spent years editing myself in rooms like this, making myself lighter, making myself less, filing down the parts of me that didn't fit the story my mother was telling about our family. I was very good at it. It is a particular skill, becoming invisible, and like most skills, it gets easier the longer you practice it. I didn't want to practice it anymore. I looked at my mother and I said, I love you. But what you told these people about me tonight, and what you've been telling people for years, it isn't protecting anyone. It's protecting a version of the family you built in your head, and I don't live in that version. I never did. I paused. If you want me in the room, then I have to be in the room as myself. That's the only version of this I'm still able to do. She flinched. My uncle bowed his head. I picked up my blazer and my bag. Dr. Whitmore's card went into my jacket pocket. I let myself out the front door and stood on the porch for a moment in the November cold. The street was quiet. Someone down the block had put up Christmas lights already. The old-fashioned white ones that blink slowly. And they were doing their slow blinking over the front of a house that looked like every house on every street where I had ever tried to fit myself into a shape that was never going to be the right shape. The next morning, 9 texts from my mother, escalating. You humiliated this family in front of very important people. I hope your buildings are enough to keep you company. You have always done this. From Theo, at 2 a.m. I don't know how to think about tonight yet, but I want you to know I'm not mad at you. I'm working through some things. From my aunt, at 7:45 a.m., a single text. Call me when you're ready, not to talk about last night, just to talk. From a number I didn't have saved. This is Gerald Whitmore. Margaret wanted me to pass along that she meant what she said about the consultation. She also said to tell you that she's been describing that entrance sequence to people for 6 months and she's very glad she finally gets to say it to your face. Gee, I sat with my coffee and read them in order. I didn't call anyone back right away. I watered the plant on my windowsill, which was doing better than it had any right to do, and I watched the street come awake outside, and I thought about the refrigerator door and the empty column and the gold stars that never accumulated on my side of the chart. I had stopped waiting for gold stars a long time ago. But I hadn't realized, until that moment, how much energy I was still spending on managing the fact that they weren't coming, showing up and making myself smaller so no one had to feel the contrast, editing my answers, leaving my blazer in the car, taking the seat by the hallway door. The consultation with Dr. Whitmore's foundation started the following month. It was not a small project. It had scope and a timeline and a budget that my principal called the kind of commission that changes a practice, and he said it quietly, in the way he says things he actually means. I called my mother about a month later. Not because I had figured out what to say, but because not calling was a decision too, and I didn't want to make it by default. She answered on the second ring. She was quiet for a moment after I said hello. Then she said, I have been thinking about what Dr. Whitmore said. I waited. She said I was erasing you. Another pause. I've been thinking about whether that's what it looked like, whether that's what I was doing. Is that what you were doing? A long silence. I think, I told myself I was managing things, keeping things smooth. You've always been. You've never needed what Theo needed. He wore everything on the outside. You kept everything in. And I think somewhere along the way I started treating that like it meant you didn't have anything to lose. I thought about that for a while. I always had something to lose, I said. I just didn't show you where I kept it. She was quiet. When she spoke again, her voice was different, smaller. I didn't go to the Kensington Clinic, she said. After the dinner, I looked it up. I found the article from the Inquirer. A pause. The reporter called it quietly radical. I know, I said. I was there. I know you were there. I'm saying, I read it. I read the whole thing. And then I looked at the photo. And I thought about the fact that you called me the night it opened. And I talked about Theo's bonus. She stopped. I don't know how to say that I'm sorry in a way that accounts for how many times I should have said it before. You just said it in a way that accounts for some of them, I said. That's something. It wasn't a fixed thing. Families don't fix. They shift, and the shift is always smaller than you imagined, and also, occasionally, more real. My mother didn't become someone who understood what I did or why I did it. But she started asking. Not in the broad, deflecting way where the question is really about filling a pause. In the specific way, the where does a project start way, the what does a client actually want way, the way people ask when they've decided they want to know the answer. Last spring she drove up from Wilmington on a Saturday. No occasion. She wanted to see the Kensington Clinic. I took her on a Saturday morning when the waiting room was quiet and the light came through the entrance, the way I had drawn it. At an angle that didn't blind anyone coming in, that fell on the floor instead of in your eyes. That made the room feel like something you'd chosen to walk into rather than somewhere you'd had to go. She stood in the entrance for a long time. You thought of that, she said. The light. I thought of it, because I kept imagining what it would feel like to walk in here sick and scared, I said. I wanted the building to feel like it was expecting you. In a good way. She didn't say anything for a while. Then she said, I didn't know you thought about things like that. I've been thinking about things like that my whole life, I said. I just thought about them quietly. We walked through the rest of the clinic. She asked questions about the construction, the materials, the timeline. She listened, in the way that means you're actually listening, not just waiting for your turn. At the end, in the courtyard out back, where we'd kept 3 existing trees and built the seating around them, she sat down on a bench and looked at the building from the outside. It looks like it grew here, she said. That's what I was going for, I said. We sat there in the sun for a while. It was the longest I had been in the same quiet space with my mother in years, without one of us trying to manage the other one. I don't know what she was thinking about. I was thinking about the refrigerator door, and the empty column, and the fact that at some point the chart had come down. I couldn't even remember when. And been replaced with a school calendar and then nothing, and then a list of grocery store coupons. And how for years I had operated as though the chart were still up there, still tracking, still coming back with 1 star to my brother's column of 12. Some charts you take down yourself, even when nobody tells you to. I went back to my studio that afternoon. There was a model on the drafting table from the Northeast Clinic project, still in progress, a white foam thing that looked like a small city and told you almost nothing about what it would feel like to actually be inside it. That's the thing about models. They show you the structure. They don't show you the light. I had a project to build. I knew how to do that. I started with the entrance.